Let me hear your bar. Let me see you bite. Let me see your scar. You know what we about. Come see us in the yard. This is war. Golden Ripper hard. Dogs in the house. 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 Dogs in the house.
Hello and welcome to All We Hear is Purple. We're the third or fourth most mediocre Husky football podcast on the internet. I'm Andrew Berg, and joining me on the panel today is Mark Schaefer. Mark, hello.
Hello, Andrew.
And also joining me is Luke Kemper. Luke, hello.
Hello.
Let's jump right into it. The Huskies are back to their winning ways with a victory over USC at home, helped to get back to Husky Stadium. Really, the thing that seemed to define this victory was the defense and the two stands down near the goal line late in the game. Carson Bruner was huge. Kamori House made that crazy tackle springing through the defensive line to tackle Woody Marks. What was it, Mark, from your opinion, that made this defense so effective against a really talented group of offensive players at USC?
Well, I think it's just been what's made the defense effective all year, where we have the athletes to go man to man with people. You look at Carson Bruner, you had one interception where he's jumping. He had a few pass deflections where he was kind of going up and showing off that athletic ability. But I think also the weather helped. It was very rainy. And Lincoln Riley was being stubborn with the play calling, throwing Miller Moss. I think it was like an even 60 times a game or an even 60. It could have been 61, 62. It was a lot. He threw the ball a lot. But yeah, I think just being sticky and opportunistic in man coverage is really just what put us over the line.
It was interesting. Well, first of all, about Bruner's interception, with the first interception, he must have like a world record for the number of those interceptions where he's in the underneath part of the zone and the quarterback just forgets that he's there and throws it kind of right above his head, and he just has to reach up and intercept it. I feel like he's done that about 6 times in his career, and it's great. I don't know how you miss somebody as bulky and powerful as he is in coverage. But also, you make a very good point about the play calling, because it seemed like there was a stretch in the second half when USC started to feed Woody Marks a little bit more, and it was working. They ran about 6 times in a row behind the right side of the offensive line, and we just did not have an answer for that. But the more they went back to Miller Moss in the passing game, it kind of played into what our defensive strength is. So thank you for that, Lincoln Riley. I know you like to tell everybody how close USC is to winning these games, but
Just one play away.
Yeah, it may have been self-inflicted, one play away, and we'll take it. On the other side, 26 points for the Huskies on offense. That's kind of what we've come to expect. It's not the explosiveness of last year. It's not 35 points per game, but there was a heavier dose of Jonah Coleman, and it was effective. He played well. It was another good game for Denzel Boston. He had 9 catches for 99 yards. The team was more creative, found some space in the red zone, kind of moving side to side, getting the ball outside the tackles on the ground. Luke, do you think this is kind of the offensive blueprint we should expect for the rest of the year? Is there anything else that can be done to fine tune what we have offensively?
I think that the offense is finally starting to settle down a bit. I mean, I think we all remember the first, 3 or 4 weeks where, the offense in the first quarter couldn't score any points, and they just always seemed a little sluggish to start. And I think that we finally have gelled as a team enough, particularly on offense, where we were finally able to not have the slow start that we were getting in the beginning of the year. I'm not sure what this team's ceiling is for the offense. I mean, we've all seen the huge flashes. I mean, Coleman is just a beast week in and week out. He's always expected to break out a big run. He had that awesome, I think it was an 18-yard touchdown. And I mean, Denzel Boston just continues to be the pillar really of the receiving group. And I I pointed it out on a previous podcast that on scoring drives for UW in the Big Ten play, it continues to be a trend that UW has to throw it to Boston, apparently, if we want to get points on the board. Even if he is not the one catching the touchdown passes, anytime he gets involved, it seems that is the prerequisite for putting points on the board for the Dogs this year. I've been really happy with Latu. He has shown some very good reliability, particularly on third downs or getting first downs in general and extending those drives. It's a very underrated skill that Westover made look so easy last year. And with Moore still injured, it was a big question mark on if we could count on the tight end position to really be a factor for those downs and distances to really bring those drives home into the end zone. So I think the offense is really finding their identity, and as long as they can play clean and penalty free, who knows?
Yeah, I think that's true. Getting more Coleman and the way that you described him is exactly right. It seems like there's always going to be issues with the offensive line on this team. It's just not a deep and super high end group right now. Offensive lines playing together can develop over time, but the performance just hasn't been great this year. I'm curious if you guys think the play calling is kind of maximizing what we can do. We've seen them kind of try to go to more screen passes, but it's not so much that teams are like blitzing like crazy. It's more that the they're getting pressure with four guys. And Rodgers isn't great when he has to try to escape the pocket and get on the move and try to make plays with his feet. He can evade pressure a little bit, but it usually doesn't lead to anything great. Is this just kind of what it is, or is there anything you think we could do better to kind of help him out and make the offense a little bit more effective given the limitations on the line?
I think we've pretty much reached the point where this offense probably isn't going to develop any more than it has. But we just got to find a way to get our best players involved in the offense, and hopefully that'll lead to more points.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And we kind of saw some of that with the short and intermediate passing. And it seems like that's a highlight, getting the ball to Boston, getting, Jackson moving, getting him the ball while he's moving forward and in space. Yeah, those seem to be the things. Anything else? We had a chat in our writers group this week a little bit about Jeremiah Hunter and how he continues to not be very visible. Any other kind of situations, Mark, where you think we could get more out of Jeremiah Hunter, or is it just kind of a matter of we have Denzel Boston, so we don't need quite as much from Jeremiah Hunter?
Probably considering how big he is, you want another guy that you can go to in the red zone, but Boston, I think, is an inch taller, so I think that kind of makes him redundant. So maybe you can get him like more slants or more of that quick passing game. Because he had just under 1,000 yards last year at Cal, I think.
Yeah.
And I thought that was that was the amount of usage that we were going to get out of him this year, because he seems like he would be a number one option on any other team. And that just hasn't been the case this year. And we're just gonna have to make do with what we have. And like I said, at this point in the year, I think the offense has established its identity. So
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Christian Capel wrote about this week. I think he went from like 80 to 90 targets each of the last 2 years. He's on pace for just under 60 this year. I might have those numbers slightly wrong, but it's in that neighborhood. And I think it really just is where he fits in the hierarchy on this offense. So kind of is what it is. Are there any other players from this game? We talked a little bit about Carson Bruner and some of the offensive playmakers, but Luke, anybody else in this game who you want to kind of call out for being a big part of the reason why the Huskies are back to winning again.
He was only in for one play, and you
Yeah.
know exactly what I'm talking about. The claw,
Yeah.
Lance Holt's claw, getting in there, really putting pressure on Miller Moss on the final play of the game to ice it. I mean, shout out to Holt's claw. That was an awesome win off the edge with some speed rush to really get in his face and truly ice the game. So shout out to him.
Yeah. I'd also say, I mean, not flashy, but we talked a little bit about Kaleki Latu, but just his dependability this year with the early injury to Moore at tight end, and Latu's been healthy, available, productive, and really like about as good as you could hope for somebody coming in as a veteran player who hasn't had crazy production in his previous stops, but has been really, really consistent and reliable as a safety valve for Rodgers as a pass catching tight end. So really like the work that he's done this year as well. Mark, anybody you want to point out?
Shout out to Keith Reynolds, by the way.
Yeah.
First career touchdown on a little jet
That's right.
sweep. I think he's going to be a special player as long as he gets more playing time next year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a
he
nice
is
play.
fast.
He is probably a good bet to step into Giles Jackson's role next year. I don't know if he'll be as consistent as Jackson right away, but yeah, he's shifty and fast, and getting him into space will be good things. I like Decker DeGraff along that little tiptoe on the sideline for his one catch that he made. Got good yardage out of it as well. So it's always fun to talk about guys who contributed to wins more than guys who contributed to losses, isn't it? All right, we're going to continue in part 2 talking about Penn State coming up, the whiteout game. So stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back. The Huskies are getting ready to travel across the country to central Pennsylvania. It'll be the Huskies and the Nittany Lions in IMAX theaters. I don't know if you saw this, but they're broadcasting in certain movie theaters as well as on Peacock. The Huskies play Penn State, who's coming off a loss to Ohio State, their first loss of the year. It was the same game they always play. It was low scoring. Penn State couldn't get the touchdowns at the end. Ohio State came away with, I think, its 10th win in 11 tries against James Franklin. The offense for Penn State has been more efficient this year. They hired Kansas's offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, but still not very high scoring and still some of the same problems. They're not, I don't think they completed a touchdown pass to a wide receiver all year. Even in spite of that, Drew Aller has really good efficiency stats. Both Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are super talented, terrifying running backs, although they haven't totally captured the magic of like a two-headed running back monster where they both go for 100 yards in the same game or something like that. And then maybe their biggest offensive playmaker is Ty Warren, the tight end, who more than makes up for the lack of receiver production. So taking that all into consideration, Luke, what do you think would be a good performance from this Husky defense? What do they need to do, and is it realistic to expect them to, kind of keep this game within reach?
Man, we really are in the Big Ten now. It seems like every preview that we're doing, oh yeah, they don't have a great passing offense.
Yep.
A couple of good running backs and an excellent tight end. I mean, I think we've had that same setup a good 4 times at least now. So it's kind of just funny reminiscing about that.
It's true.
The one thing I'm going to be looking for our defense is going to be stopping Penn State on third down. Their third down efficiency is 47.25%. That's almost 50%. That's pretty darn good. 50-50 of getting conversion on your third down. For context, that's nearly a full 10% better than UW's offense this year. So that's going to be something to watch on both ends, in my opinion. But like you mentioned, Drew Allard, when it comes to good passing defenses, is not getting it done historically. I mean, Ohio State last week is no exception. He didn't have a passing touchdown. I think their only touchdown was on defense. They might have had a rushing touchdown, but regardless, Allard was not the one to find the end zone for them. And I'm not worried about our pass defense. That hasn't been the issue all year. We're second in the nation in total pass defense. That hasn't been the issue. And it's not that our running game has been, or our run defense has been completely detrimental, despite how it looked against USC, just getting run over by William Marks for what felt like 8 yards a carry in the third quarter. But I think that much like Iowa and Rutgers, that Belichick knows that he's going to need to stack the box to beat a team like this. He knows that it is very important to scheme against that and make them beat you with ways that you're already good against.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I misspoke earlier when I said no passing touchdowns to receivers. That's only in Big Ten play, but that's still really a disturbing stat if you're a Penn State fan that they've gone through their entire conference schedule without throwing a touchdown pass to their receivers. And they have some good receivers. I mean, Julian Fleming is supposed to be quite talented. Harrison Wallace has put up some good numbers. And you can see it in, Aller's not going to have 10 yards per attempt and 70% completions just throwing like screens and swing passes to running backs and finding his tight end, although his tight end is outstanding. So I think you're right, Luke, that I know there have been very few times this year when you've watched the Huskies play and you've questioned their defensive scheme or their defensive play calling. Belichick's been really, really strong in that regard. There are times when you question if we have the horses, if we have the guys up front to stuff guys like Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. But, the way Penn State's been playing, they don't put up like 35 points that often. So Mark, if you take that into consideration, maybe it is realistic to hold Penn State in the 20s. What do the Huskies need to do offensively to keep up with that? This is kind of like Luke mentioned, the vintage Penn State defense, the vintage Big Ten defense. What do the Huskies need to do to crack that? Ohio State just scored 20 points against them. We're probably going to need to do better than that. What would that look like?
Well, I was talking to Black Shoe Diaries' Brian Bennett for the Q&A this week, which should be out probably today as you're listening to this. He says the defensive line and secondary have played really, really well. And Tom Allen, the Penn State's defensive coordinator, was the head coach at Indiana last year. He's good at making halftime adjustments. So I think knowing all of that and knowing what we know about the weaknesses of our offensive line, I would say to run the ball, but if your offensive line can't get good push, then what good's running the ball? So I think quick passing game, running the ball, and maybe try to beat them over the top, but then secondary is really good. So
Yeah, it beat him over the top, like we were talking about earlier, can be tricky with our offensive line too, because you need time for the guys to get downfield. I did notice, like, if you look a little bit under the hood at their defensive numbers, and this is probably a lot to do with the linebacker play that you were mentioning, it's really got to come down to those quick passes and the intermediate passes, I think. Just like the slants to Boston and Jackson coming across the formation and just getting the ball out quickly. Because I think you're right. It's going to be scary to try to pass protect against that defensive front. Any other thoughts from either of you about what to look for in this game? It's going to be the whiteout at away to Penn State. It's going to be a thing to behold, an exciting spectacle to watch, I think. But what are you going to be excited for in this kind of like first time matchup outside of the Fiesta Bowl 6 or 7 years ago?
I'm just hoping that Ty Warren doesn't pull a Jack Coletto and throw for a touchdown or something, or run for a touchdown.
Yeah.
I looked at his stat.
Mike Gesicki was the tight end in that Fiesta Bowl, right? And I think he pretty much ate us alive when we played them that time.
I looked at Ty Warren's stats. He's 2 for 2 with a touchdown in terms of throwing the ball. So
Yeah, he's probably more of a threat to complete a touchdown pass to a wide receiver than Aller is. Yeah, that was we probably don't need to spend a lot of time reminiscing about that Fiesta Bowl where Saquon Barkley had 137 rushing yards, but it felt like 337.
some say
And
he's still running.
yeah, yeah.
Reverse
Gesicki,
hurdling
yeah, yeah.
everywhere.
He hasn't stopped. He hasn't stopped. Um, Before we wrap up, we have this week was the first Husky basketball game of the year. We talked a little bit preview. We intended to last week, but had to get canceled for scheduling purposes. But the Huskies beat UC Davis. Any initial thoughts from a game that was probably a little bit closer than we would have liked to see, but ultimately the Dogs pulled it out?
So I have a couple. First of all, I read a stat today. Great Osabor, new Husky forward, is the first player with 15 plus points, 15 plus rebounds, and 6 steals in a game since Blake Griffin did it in 2009.
That's a good one.
That guy is special. I mean, you see him running the point, you see him doing all the no-look passes, like getting other guys involved, throwing alley-oops to Frank Kepnon. It's he's just gonna be the guy that we run our offense through because we can't shoot otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just watched the highlights of the game, but shooting 2 for 14 on threes is not really a recipe for success in 2014, 20 or 2024, 2025. Unless you're getting to the line twice as much as your opponent, which they almost did, but then shot 55% at the line. So I think making the free throws once you get there will be important for this team as well. But Osabor is super exciting. And I think he will, he was 7 for 16 from the line himself. And if that kind of corrects a little bit, he's probably in that 20 and 10 range pretty consistently. And he's a very exciting player. Luke, did you get a chance to check out the basketball game?
I did. I have quite a few thoughts, but I'll try and keep it a little bit brief. First thought was, were Hopkins coaching this team this year? This would be a loss. So shout out to Sprinkle for getting your first win as a Husky head coach. Very well conditioned, I'll say that for sure. Even for a first game, they looked very lively, being able to really run up and down the courts, and I think that really was the difference in the end. I know it was a lot closer than we wanted it to be, but an unconditioned team would have lost that game, in my opinion, for sure. I thought that it was pretty sloppy, which is expected in a first game, but my only real critique, and this is, Osabor is a phenomenal player. I'm going to preface that right now. This isn't on him in particular. I think it's more on the staff and how they can adjust the offense to run a little bit smoother. When he was on the elbow or high post area, the offense just completely stalled. So because when the opponent dropped into zone, having him up there on the high post really just clustered everything up. It made passing lanes that much harder, and dribbling through there when you have an extra defender sitting there in a 2-3 was just not working. So
It's probably hard to play
go
like
ahead.
high-low like that with the 2 posts when there's no shooting threat that the high defender has to respect. If they're just gonna always collapse down on the post and the up at the free throw line, it's just gonna make a lot of tight spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And Osabor's got a pretty good mid-range game as well. So he's definitely a threat. But as soon as the ball went into his hands in the high post, I mean, it made things pretty messy. If they were playing man to man, that particular offensive scheme can definitely work. But when they're playing zone, you dare them to take explosive or one-on-one in the post. And he's a good enough passer, particularly out of the post position, where he can swing it out. I mean, we saw him try and make some one-look passes. Some were really good, some not. That definitely wouldn't fly in Big Ten competition, but it's good to have that confidence and work with your teammates to really hone your skills and your craft a little bit in the early season before you are taking it to the serious competition.
Definitely, yeah. And it was a game to forget for the we don't really have a true point guard, but the combo guards, DJ Davis and Ian Acho, combined for 1 for 11 shooting and 4 turnovers to 1 assist. It's not really what you want from your lead ball handlers, but I think especially Davis has a long track record of being a really productive high level player at Butler. So I'm not worried about him continuing to shoot the way he did. And I'm sure that they'll get that straightened out, just an off night for the guards. But let's finish up with some recommendations and plugs. A chance to recommend a non-football related thing that we could talk about for people to do over the next week as they get ready for the Penn State game. Mark, you want to go first? Anything you want to plug?
I don't have anything I want to plug, but I want to shout out DJ Davis for being a transfer from Butler. I love Butler because that's where my sister went to school.
Oh, cool. She wasn't there during the Gordon Hayward
No,
wonderful years, was she?
she was there during the Laval Jordan era, which is
Oh, okay.
not very many people remember that very fondly. So
Yeah. I mean that those 2 years where the Brad Stevens national championship runs where they went to the title game 2 years in a row, and they came within that Gordon Hayward half court shot that rimmed out of actually winning a national championship. That would have been like one of the great Cinderella stories in sports in my lifetime and probably in the last century.
mhm. But yeah, shout out to Butler, shout out to Thad Matta, shout out to Greg Oden. So
All right. Uh, Luke, anything on your end you want to recommend outside of the football field?
Yes, I gave a food recommendation a couple of pods ago that I was on. I'm giving another one now. Last one was definitely more on the hearty and Midwestern style food. This one is a little more on the lean side. It's a company slash influencer that goes by Stealth Health Life. I believe his name is Tom Walsh, and he has a lot of really excellent videos on not only healthy meals, but taking meals that are already some of our favorites and just making them a little bit healthier. He has a pollo asado recipe that I've made many times, and it is really good. And the macros on it are excellent and it's really delicious. I recommend that one.
Awesome. I'm a pollo asado fan, especially living in a country where there are no like even moderately acceptable Mexican restaurants. So it's all coming off the grill here. Um, so yeah, I was going to recommend the Monsters series. It's available on Netflix. It's about the season. The most recent season is about the Menendez brothers, uh, and it's the dramatic version. There was also a documentary that came out around the same time. I believe it's the writer producer of the American Horror Story series that was on TV a few years ago, but now doing more of a true crime fictionalization. I didn't really know what to expect with this series, but it's kind of a like Rashomon style where you get the same events told from a bunch of different perspectives, and you're left to decide which one seems more plausible to you. It's surprisingly entertaining. I'm a kind of a crime TV and book junkie, so if you're into that sort of thing, not a bad series to watch. And God, what a depressing and crazy story they had and continue to have, I guess. I think that's it. Any final thoughts, Mark, Luke? Anything you want to add before we get out of here? I'll
No,
take that as a maybe. Thanks to both of you for joining. We're just always getting closer. I'm had some actual discussions this week offline about how and when we will get Cody Pickett on the podcast, which will be a great day for all of us. But in the meantime, thanks everybody for listening and go dogs.
Go Dogs.
go dogs.